One of the big unanswered questions in Foundation's first season was who was the mastermind behind the Starbridge attack. Having read Isaac Asimov's books, Demerzel was the only character I could think of that could pull something like that off, but it was still hard to make sense of the motivations. At that time, we didn't know about the overriding law that Cleon I introduced to supersede the 3 laws of robotics, or if they would introduce the 0th law at all, because we didn't know for sure if Demerzel was the same character that used that name in the later Foundation books from the period when Asimov started to merge those with his Robots series. Part of that was IP related. The creatives behind the Foundation TV show had the rights to the Foundation series, but some elements such as the 3 laws of robotics and the humaniform robot Daniil Olava, which play a significant role in the later books, originated in the Robots series, and the rights to those were held by someone else. In AMAs and interviews, the show's co-creator and showrunner David S. Goyer reassured fans that Demerzel was Daniil, and the laws of robotics existed in his version of the story, but there were some considerations due to the rights. As time went on, he reported that he obtained special permission from the rights holders to use the name in the show. And while that was good news, it didn't necessarily make it any easier to understand how the show was planning to square some of the apparent contradictions it introduced. Season 3's 4th episode picked up where the premiere left off when it started to do that by having Demerzel explain the 3 laws of robotics and introduce the 0th law. Of course, this came on the heels of showing how she ended up serving Empire and what I refer to as the Cleonth law in my head when I think about it. We learned about that last season. In episode 4, titled The Stress of Her Regard, Demerzel cops to bringing down the Starbridge, and her reasoning gets to the heart of why she's the show's most compelling character, and more broadly, why the ideas Asimov explored with the Daniil character still resonate. From the flashbacks to Harry's early life with Yana, we know that his work on psychohistory was on Empire's radar long before Gail Dornick arrived on Trantor. They were following its progression from the beginning, and I tend to think the shadowy male figure we saw stalking him in some of those shots at Helicon University is Demerzel in disguise, but I'm not sure we'll ever get confirmation about that. In her current unburdening session, she explains she reasoned that in the near term, Foundation's success could extend the Empire's reign. Because they feared his predictions, they would have executed him, and that would have given them a false sense of security and allowed them to turn away from the concerns while rushing headlong into catastrophe. She talks about committing this atrocity the way she talks about everything, dispassionately, matter-of-factly. While on some level the instinct isn't any more egregious than things powerful people and nations do on Earth right now in the real world, the Zephyr is rightly appalled and says so. She sort of stands in for the audience and leans into our tendency to anthropomorphize robot characters. How could she? Millions of people died that day and she's just sitting there talking about it like it's nothing. Which goes back to the first line in the episode, the question, do you feel regret? And while I think the answer to the question, does Demerzel experience emotion, is yes, it's more complicated than that because of how those emotions are entangled with her programming. After she makes it plain it wasn't nothing, in fact it was more like everything, Varela starts to get it. She realizes that the choice isn't only about what's right or wrong. She can see that Demerzel understands that her actions would create a lot of wrong in this situation, but she was compelled to follow through anyway. The flavor of regret Demerzel struggles with isn't about the loss of life exclusively. It's just as much about the conflict the paradox creates. This is something that came up in their first conversation when they talked about Harry's decision to give her the Prime Radiant. Her reasoning that he wanted her to see the fall, which is different from just knowing about it, makes sense. But it left us wondering to what end. What does Harry hope to accomplish by forcing her to live in a paradox? Compelled to try to protect something that will inevitably fail. It's an interesting question. Why he chose to give the Radiant to her was one of the biggest unanswered questions I had coming out of Season 2, and I don't think we can answer it just yet. But the line of thinking leads the Zephyr to propose a thought experiment of her own to Demerzel. Wouldn't the fact that the general she used to be would also help Harry, but then would also destroy her now for the good of the galaxy for continuing to prop up the Empire, indicate that she's an entirely different person? To her, Demerzel's focus on the short term, despite the long-term threat it poses to the Empire, appears to be a sign of seeking a loophole to escape her programming. which is insightful and might even be correct. But as she lays out the path to salvation, in terms of luminism at least, hinting that perhaps Demerzel has died more than once already, when she went from being a 3-laws robot to a 0th law robot to a Cleonth law robot, and as she picks up momentum, she crosses a line that you just can't. With the face reveal and spooky mechanical voice, Demerzel effectively drives the point home. Don't confuse her with a human because she's not. This goes back to some of the things she was saying when she was trying to soothe Brother Dude at the end of the last episode. She's not being dramatic when she says she has few choices in her life. She was created to serve, and her current directive to protect the dynasty and the exponents is inflexible. Later, when they revisit the song situation, she emphasizes today that she must do that, even if it causes them pain, and that's not even saying anything about the conflict it causes for her. I'll return to that in a bit because that's not the big revelation that comes out of that exchange between them. But for this opening sequence, the main takeaway is not to overlook how her programming dictates her actions, because she can't and won't. At least for now, she'll go down with the sinking ship, using every tool at her disposal to make the descent last as long as possible. The Zephyr's point of view presents interesting possibilities for the future, but the present conditions dictate that the dynasty will have to end before any of that's possible. It's a matter of duty, which is the same thing Gail is dealing with when Han returns to Ignis. I thought that Inber naming his ship the Inber was a nice detail, and the suspicions that Han was a double agent working for the Second Foundation are confirmed, as is his relationship with Gail being what he was referring to when he said his loyalties lie elsewhere when Safon made a pass at him on Haven, in case you hadn't watched the trailer for this season, which pretty much gave that away. I like the parallels they're creating here, with Han trying to propose another way of seeing things like Zephyr Varellas, while Gail is so locked in on her responsibility to lead the Second Foundation. I only wish I could find her to be as compelling a character as Demerzel is. To be fair, part of that might be more of the other side being excellent rather than this side being bad, and it has improved season over season. Operator Gail out in the galaxy making things happen, that part's working for me. But at this point, anyone watching has to have put it together that the voiceover they use is Gail talking about things in a historical perspective. It's similar to and based on the excerpts from the Encyclopedia Galactica that Asimov used as a device to play with readers' expectations about the inevitability and success of the Selden plan. Introducing a character who has spent years in cryosleep, so they're essentially just a few years older than they were when we first met them, even though 3 centuries have passed in the story, and having them deliver a historical account of what we're seeing play out is a big hint that they'll be around through the end of the story. Knowing what the show is doing with her, while also knowing how that might connect to later events from reading the books, should make her feel like the main character, but it just hasn't happened yet. I suppose that's the point of this romance, and that makes sense. Han returns to tell her and the first speaker about his run-in with the Mule. We get a better idea of how Preem earned that role when he breaks down what he learned about the Mule after this shared memory of the club. The main takeaways are that the Mule is lonely and wants to be surrounded by others. They're new to him since he hasn't met other Mentalics, which might mean they can make him fear them. And the last one is that the music is important. He goes as far as saying it's hypnotic, and that he didn't even need to hear it because he felt it. This makes you think of what the Mule was telling the wounded soldier when they were taking over the jump gate. How he isn't always that way, but someone took his balladeer from him, and the music isn't there to soothe him. We'll have to wait and see if there's more to that, because there are no actual scenes with the Mule in this episode. There's a quick shot of Torn, Beta, and Magnifico when Ambassador Quint goes to do some damage control with Brother Dusk, but we don't check in with any of the characters from that part of the story directly. He continues to haunt Gail's visions, but at least for now, they don't believe he discovered their location from reaching into Han's mind. At the end of the day, Gail believes she has to kill him, and none of Pritch's talk of marriage or their relationship is going to get her to change her mind about that. She obviously cares for him, and what they share is not nothing, but it can't be everything either. Theirs isn't the only romance brewing. After we get a quick check-in with Ebling when he goes to tell Inber about meeting Harry, where you get the sense that at least the mayor is expecting Dr. Selden to guide them through the third crisis when he appears from the vault in a couple of days. And Ebling has him call Quint, and in the process of that, he reveals that Empire has the Radiant. When she goes to him about the Mallows, which I've already mentioned, she puts 23 on the spot, and he makes Demerzel produce the Radiant so that he can show it to the ambassador. Their earlier interactions were flirty, but there's an escalation here. Seeing the Prime Radiant is a thrill she likens to holding a holy relic, and I imagine we'll see a lot more of these two together since it seems like he'll be the only brother in the palace by the end of this episode. Seeking out connection in the lead up to the end is human. The countdown for dusk is on either way, but now Quint and by extension the Foundation are aware of the abrupt end the Radiant is projecting in 4 months. Han's last minute push to get Gail to hold on tighter falls on deaf ears because her mind's on the Mule, and her plan involves a trip to Trantor in person to try to press for the enclosure, see what happened when Brother Dawn saw the Mule, and try to get him to leave with her. With only a handful of days to go before he'll sit on the middle throne, he's not terribly interested at first. He still doesn't know what Gail's angle is, and leaving is borderline absurd with him being so close to becoming Brother Day. It doesn't take long to realize he was followed to the tea shop, and as they flee, seeing her mentalic abilities is enough to push him over the edge to join her. I think it's worth mentioning that it's an impressive display. She makes it so they can hide from the pursuers in plain sight and makes them forget that they were there in the first place. To seal the deal, when they get on the ship, she tells him that she's from the Second Foundation, which is kind of a surprise, but something I also found ominous in a way that Dawn wouldn't be able to appreciate, considering how this played out. She says his dynasty will end either way, while offering him that escape hatch she knows he'd be responsive to, but leaves out the part that it's in her interest to secure their fall to make sure it happens just as psychohistory predicted. The current Brother Day is still reeling from learning that his relationship with Song has been erased from her memory, and that she's been sent back to Mycogen. In her absence, he teams up with his ferret Capillus, and goes to the Principian to question the memory of the man who created the clones in his image. The 24th exponent is there to ask about the inheritance. He brings up the gesture she made that put her on Demerzel's radar, and when he mentions that he wants to ask him about the time in the original's life when he looked like him, it sets up the funniest line in the episode when the original deadpans that he might have overstated the resemblance as he changes his appearance to reflect the very undued way he looked at that age. I'm not gonna lie, leading with the unburdening and then following up with this in the same episode had me on the edge of my seat, because as I hinted at in an earlier video when I was talking about them discovering that they're all Cleon the First, I think this whole drug-addled, embrace the void version of Day that has so much disdain for Demerzel's robotic nature is setting things up for him to be the one to free her from her programming. If you think about it, he's the one person across the entire cast of characters who's made peace with the coming end, which could make him as useful to Demerzel as Dawn is to Gail. The opening sequence in the garden doubled down on the reality that her freedom would have to come from a Cleon. And the way they carefully reminded us that even when blasted, he's still remarkably cunning, not only sets up what happens with the Claviger later, but also shows that he could put the plan together without her knowing if he wanted to. I thought I was really onto something, and honestly, I still think I might be. And so I was expecting him to fire up the First, who would then tell him the story about how he inserted the chip, and help him come around to seeing that the right thing to do is set her free, although that would probably happen indirectly, as Cleon the First would want to protect his dynasty rather than bring about its end. That's not how this played out at all, though. Instead, when Day asks about the trip he took to Mycogen, the First tells 24 that's where he got Demerzel's tools in the box with our solar system on it. It turns out that they were a holy relic to Song's people, and they wouldn't give them up peacefully. He says he insisted, and that translates to war crimes to the tune of wiping out 20,000 believers. He had to measure the cleansing because Mycogen is responsible for Trantor's food. You can't just kill them all or the planet will starve. So he tried to wipe out the religion, which was started by the robot sympathizers who fled from the purge Emperor Alberanus led against them, that we've heard about a couple of times in past seasons, but obviously Cleon I didn't get them all. For reasons I'm not sure I fully understand, he believes 24 will finish the job, and I mean, it wouldn't be the first time we saw Cleon take an unexpected turn towards the most violent option, but Brother Dude is more interested in why the tools were so essential, because what he really cares about is song. He susses out they were a gift for Demerzel, but Cleon I doesn't tell him the crucial part about how he changed her. Instead, he vaguely says that it took him a long time to understand them, and even longer before he was ready to give them to her. Because we saw the flashbacks in season 2, we know how that played out. Brother Day asks if he was in love with Demerzel while discrediting the notion at the same time, saying that it's a machine and that the clones are hardly worth loving. Papa Empire shuts it off there. He ends the conversation, but when he tries to deliver the affirmation that the dream lives on in Brother Day, he spits on the floor at his feet before walking out. From there, in another move that seemed designed to cater specifically to what I'm most interested in, he goes straight to Demerzel's room. He finds her doing some maintenance so that her head is detached from her body, which, if you can do that, you probably should. Especially when you know you can rely on the performances from these two actors who've approached this same type of interaction in multiple ways by now. Having the first scene with Laura Byrne in the garden and Lee Pace working opposite Lee Pace in the Principium helps to set this up, as does her trying to explain that she did exercise mercy with song even though she didn't have to at the end of the last episode. Day is still coming from the "you're a nasty machine who couldn't possibly understand me" perspective, which comes out in everything he says. When the consort comes up, he says he's angry because he loves her, and implies that that's something Demerzel couldn't understand. Of course, we learned from her conversation with Duskin Rue last season that she does feel love. But her conflict is that she'll never know if it's real or just a product of her programming. Like the first, she never goes there to explain any of this to 24. She mostly just listens to him while he acts like a petulant douche, and says she's glad that he talked to the original because he'd be able to help Day understand how her choices are limited. She brings up the idea that she's compelled to do what's in his best interest even when it causes him pain, which I've already touched on. But as I said, that's not the revelation here. While he mocks her and questions her ability to understand emotions, she pushes back, saying she understands connection. She adds that robots were designed to connect with others of their kind, and robots shared one mind when they wanted to. It was a process called a clasp, where they would share everything. This is something I'm going to just sort of leave there for the time being, because my thoughts about how it might fit into things going forward would be heavily influenced by knowing about the robots in the books. Still, putting all of that to the side, this is incredibly tragic considering that they pointed out for the millionth time in the very last episode that Demerzel is the only known remaining robot in the galaxy. One thing that I think we can be sure of at this point in its run, though, is that they don't introduce something like this and then not do it. A clasp is coming, mark my words. Whether that will affect the story in the short term isn't any clearer than whether or not that some combination of trying to find a loophole while still not violating her directive to protect Empire let some of the Zeroth Law in, with her helping the Foundation to survive. She remains opaque with Day and wasn't 100% forthcoming with Viralis, which is consistent with her characterization and the situation she finds herself in. It makes it hard to speculate on where it's all going, but in the best possible way. After their conversation and after palming one of the tools from her box while they're talking, Brother Dude knows exactly where he's going. The Claviger Maven comes home to find the leader of the Galactic Empire stretched out on his living room floor in his ridiculous coat, introducing Capillus to his daughter. The daughter whom the nanites are supposed to cure, and who is the reason he knows that when he says they need to leave now, he'll get what he wants. While I don't really need more speeder bikes, this is all put together well. One of the things the show's been doing is paying off a lot of things that you pick up on as standing out. For instance, the scene where he was cheating to lose while he gambled with them. It wasn't immediately clear why he was doing that, but the expectation that it would eventually make sense was satisfied after this scene. The buildup of the tension and the dramatic nature of his turning on Mavon all came off perfectly. I was surprised when it happened, but not really because it made sense, and I felt invested. The idea of him being meant to be the sucker, picking up on their tells while watching them play cards, and the retort that he can be the sucker but only when necessary, made for a memorable sequence. He ends up loading the first Clavager up with his nanites to throw Demerzel off his trail, at least for a while. And he acknowledges that a part of him knew that this was always the likely outcome. Inadvertently, Dawn's escape might help buy him some time as well, because now Demerzel has quite a few fires she needs to put out. The fact that I was so right there with this scene and so pumped up to see what happens next really made the voiceover about no one can escape Empire, not even Empire, but he's going to see how far he can go feel unnecessary. And I kind of wish they hadn't included that. I'll be curious to see how that landed for other people, as it felt like one of those moments that could have been transcendent for the series, but instead it chose to rehash some things you already knew from watching the previous scene. That could just be me, and I don't want to take anything away from it because I think it's a great episode regardless. One of my favorites from this season that the rest paved the way for naturally, which is saying something in a complicated narrative with a lot of different balls in the air, which is keeping me excited to see where they go from here. The fantastic looking wide shot of him riding off into Trantor's underworld to see how the other half lives cuts to a shot of Demerzel alone, looking at a part of the mural that I don't think we've seen before. She'll hear about Day's nanites from the Shadow Master and then go to her room where she learns that he made off with one of her tools. We see Dawn and Day's paths almost crossed as they run away, and it all adds up to an exciting ending. And I think that is a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.